Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Today, we have a very special guest who has shown immense courage by reaching out to share her personal story of racism in the workplace. I just want to say it takes strength to step forward and speak about such experiences. And at MFU, we are truly honored when guests like Kajal call us up, message us, and say, I have a story and I don't know what to do with it, but I'd like to talk about it. And especially when guests do this on their own initiative, I just want to shout out to Kajal, who's here today, because it takes a lot to do something like this today. I have already said her name. So our guest, Kajal's decision to share not only, I guess, her story, reflects her bravery, but also highlights the importance of fostering open conversations about challenging topics like racism. And by bringing her experience along with others' experiences into the spotlight, Kajal can help contribute to a broader dialogue that I feel can lead to a greater understanding with empathy and positive change. While there's so many studies out there and lots of stats, and we'll talk about stats in a minute, well, some studies have acknowledged that racial trauma can occur in various settings. It tends to be underestimated within our Canadian society. I've been trying to find the correlation between trauma and racism while I was preparing for this episode, and it was really difficult to come across any data, any information out there. Yet every day, people of color have so many stories that occur throughout the day that could contribute to these stats. So racial trauma manifests from instances of racism or a series of events leading individuals to endure stress and mental health repercussions. So with the growing BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, and or person of color population in Canada, I think it's really crucial to recognize that racial discrimination and the resulting stress and trauma linked in racialization. This exposure subjects BIPOC Canadians to diverse forms of racism, encompassing microaggressions, which we're also going to talk about today. And I just want to lay this out. So what is racism? There are so many different ways that we can talk about this. A lot of people can argue what they want. And I think it matters who those people arguing are. If people of color are arguing that racism is existing and occurs, I think it's time for people to start listening. Dominative racism refers to old-fashioned racism. So that consists of beliefs and acts of bigotry, such as racial slurs and threats and acts of racial brutality. That still happens every day. Symbolic racism, also known as modern racism or right-wing racism, consists of negative attitudes and stereotypes about people of color. Examples including viewing them as inferior, lazy, or having criminal or aggressive tendencies. Aversive racism, also known as left-wing racism, is characterized by claiming support for racial equality and justice while holding their own implicit conflicted negative feelings towards people of color and acting in ways that are racist. And I think we see a lot of this every day. Then there's internalized racism. Internalized racism is a form of racism where people of color hold negative views of other people of color and value being white. I talk about this too, my white girl complex growing up. These values of being white adopt attributes associated with being white and distance themselves from their racial group, often preferring to socialize with white people. These are just some of the different definitions of what kinds of racism there are. I think, to be honest, matters not how you want to label it at the end of the day. These experiences by people of color happen day in, day out. And Kajal is one of many, many, many that are going through hardships and having to unpack their own trauma because it's not recognized that experiencing racism is traumatic. I'm hoping that today we can invite people listening to, again, lean into any defensiveness, lean into any desire to shut this conversation off. If you're still listening, good on you. Thank you. This conversation is not intended to offend any white people listening today, offend any people of color listening today. This conversation is merely here to help us understand that while there are lots of stats or skewed stats out there, the best way, one of the most important ways that's really underestimated is hearing people's experiences and stories. Those are the stats that we want to see more of. So thank you to Kajal for coming out. Really appreciate you being here today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I've been listening for a while, so I'm like really excited to be here.
I appreciate you listening. You sent me before the holidays your top Spotify listens, and I was right there with the Coach podcast. Yep. And there's, there was another brown girl one that you had. So it was like 3 brown girls you had.
Yeah, all 3 brown girls. It's so exciting. The Brown Girl Guilt. That was the third one.
Yes.
It's really good as well.
Yeah. That would be the child of immigrant parents guilt, I'm sure.
That one was hard to listen to. It took me a while. I would cry at almost every episode because it's so relatable.
Yeah. And you're the oldest too.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that as well. It's a bit of a different world for the older brown daughter.
It really is. Yeah. You take on like a lot of different responsibilities that you wouldn't if you were the second born.
Totally. Absolutely. I tell my sister that, but she's got the middle child complex, so I have to be gentle with her about that. So, but exactly, we pave the way for our younger siblings.
We really do.
Yeah. Well, I really am glad you're here. I wanted to get that little blurb out there. There's so much that I wanted to say about our topic today. I am so grateful that you reached out. I don't think that it's easy for many people to talk about it. That's from my own experience. Yeah. And I think when we do decide to start talking about it, it's a word or feeling that you would maybe use to describe the courage it takes to get out there and start talking about these experiences.
Well, I feel like you have to be super mindful of how you approach it because a lot of times we're told the way that we're speaking about it is the wrong way to speak about it. So it does take a lot of courage to be able to even talk about it openly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you make a really good point. This book that Carrie and I have been reading, White Tears, Brown Scars, I've mentioned it in the last quite a few episodes now. It's called How White Feminism Betrays Women of Color by Ruby Hamad. She talks a lot and lays it out there for us in a way of, oh my gosh, this is what it means when we constantly are called the aggressors.
Yeah.
Because we're responding to abuse.
Yep.
And yet it's not the right time or place to respond to that abuse.
Yeah. And I feel like it never is. We're always told it's not the right time or the right place. And then the way we go about it is always told that we're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Even though there's no right way to go about it. And how do you talk about your feelings?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're always put in a box.
You are because, well, we'll get into, some of the history and stuff. I think a lot of recognition on how important it was for me to do some of this work, especially the piece about, I shared earlier about internalized racism. Yeah. I think I fell into that. And there's been a lot of unpacking going on in my house. I've shared this a few times. Some of my own realization too is for years, I didn't know how to respond to it because of the fear of, like you said, we're not doing a good enough job responding to it. It's not the right place, not the right time. They didn't mean it that way, but that person is so nice.
Yeah.
You don't want to rock the boat, all these sorts of things. It's your best friend's cousin or what, all these reasons. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly at a place where those reasons are just not good enough anymore for me to not talk about it or approach these experiences that we're going through day in and day out.
Yeah.
And I've lost a couple friends recently because of that. Because they don't know how to talk around me anymore. They think I'm angry.
Yeah.
So
the angry brown woman.
Yeah. Kieran's so angry. And it's like, you know what? I'd be less angry if you could step it up a little and do a little more.
Yeah.
And before you decide what to do, come ask us.
Exactly.
That's the other thing. Sometimes it's like people don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And they want to do something.
Yeah.
But they miss a step by deciding to do whatever it is they're going to do. And it actually contributes to the bigger problem because our voices are not heard. Our voices aren't asked to step up. It's just this weird complex thing because we walk around the treatment that we get. Yet when someone's racist to you, you don't have to walk around. And I think for some of us growing up, we've grown up with white friends, white teachers, white bosses, white people around us, white neighbors. And I think we've just sort of become immune to the microaggressions that happen day to day.
100%.
And our parents, maybe your parents, I don't know, definitely mine wouldn't even know. That's what makes me very sad is my mom and dad wouldn't even know half the time that someone is treating them poorly because of their color. Because if they're loving, have the best intention, don't have the maybe education or language behind what's being said because people are talking circles around you, and left feeling like, oh, I must be stupid, or that didn't feel right, but maybe that was me because that person's not racist. Instead, they did it in a way that was done so swiftly
that you wouldn't even catch it.
Yeah. And that is what I am struggling with a lot lately is when you start to see it with friends and people around you, you're like, if I told you right now in the last 10 minutes how many things you just said, I'd have no friends.
Yeah, you would. That's the thing. It's so unfortunate. There's still so much stigma around it. But even just, you might have a close friend, and if you call out your close friend, somehow you're the one doing wrong. Even though you're only saying, what you said made me feel uncomfortable. But somehow you're the one who's the villain in the situation.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I feel like a lot of people have racial bias that they haven't checked. They don't know that they have racial bias. And nobody wants to be labeled as somebody who is racist. So instead of just understanding that there's a difference between racism, a racist, and racial bias, people clump everything together. We all have racial bias, but that doesn't necessarily make you racist. And I feel like a lot of her friends don't understand that. So they just choose to shut us down and be like, no, we're not talking about it. Or you just no longer have that friend in your life. So I think there's a lot of stigma still around it. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe just like break down what the differences are for anyone listening that's like, oh, I don't know the difference between racial bias, being racist?
Yes. So I feel like racial bias is like unconscious. It's the first thought when you look at somebody, the first thought that goes through your head. So if I look at another brown person, the first thought that goes to my head will be like, oh, it's another brown person like me. And then the thoughts that follow. But it's being able to turn off your brain and saying, oh, they're more than just another brown person. This person has their own experiences. And then looking at them as a person, not as just like a brown person. Whereas I feel like racism is, I would say there's more intent behind it. You're hating the person because they're brown. You're not looking at them and be like, oh, it's a brown person. You're like, oh, it's a brown person. This, and this. This is how they are. This is what they do. This is how they talk. There is middle ground, but I would say everybody has racial bias when we look at people. But to act on it would be what makes you a racist. If you're able to check your thoughts and be like, oh, that wasn't very kind. I don't know why I'm thinking that. That would be you checking your racial bias. Yeah. So I would feel like that's the biggest difference. Yeah,
well said. That's really well said. I think that's a good point because sometimes for me now when I see a person of color, like we were in Mexico recently, I'm like, oh, there's a brown person. And I'm like, yes. I look for it because it's comfort. I think I've always looked for it. I think just never acknowledged it. Because I didn't think I needed that because I don't want my white people friends.
Exactly. I do that subconsciously a lot, especially at work. Every place I walk into, I'll look around and be like, nice. I'm the only person of color again. So I feel like there's a lot of that, and that necessarily isn't racism in itself. I'm not looking and being like, oh, there needs to be more brown people. It's just acknowledging that in often spaces, I'm the only brown person or the only person of color. So there's that as well. That's like a huge side of it.
Yeah, it is. And it's a good point to say this. It's not saying anything more than we're walking into a room and identifying like, what's the context? What am I bringing into this room? And what is already there in this room? And it is going to impact. And all those people sitting in that room can say, no, it's not. But they're not of color. So of course they would say that. But when you're of color, you are going to notice that and feel it. And I think the hard thing is for a lot of people of color, we don't have It's how do you explain the feeling when you walk into a room and no one has said anything disrespectful or racist to you, but they're all white people sitting, let's say, in this boardroom, and you walk into it and you acknowledge, okay, I'm the only person of color, let alone the only brown person in here. What is that feeling? How would you describe it?
I feel like I feel anxious most of the time, and it's not necessarily because I feel like I'm going to be attacked because of that, but it's mostly just you walk into a spot, you realize you're the only one who looks different, but then it's like, do they realize that I'm the only one who looks different? So I feel like I think about it a lot in terms of, oh, I've noticed it. Has anybody else noticed it? Am I going to be treated differently? Do I have to step it up a bit more? You have to present yourself in a more, I would say, educated type of way. You need to use bigger words. You need to do this. You need to move yourself in a different way than you would if you were with people that understood the history of what, like, who you are as a person and like what you bring to the table.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a lot to unpack, especially because I grew up in the Northeast Calgary. So I was always around more brown people or people who looked like me, grew up similarly. And then growing up, that's all you see. I never realized I was a minority until I got to Mount Royal, which is a university in Calgary, that I was like fully aware, oh, I am different. I am a minority. And then from then, that's when I feel like I've like reached more into it or been more in tune to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. What was that like growing up, being around our own culture, kids that have the same rules when, you know, you can't hang out, you can't do this. It's a lot of similar parenting styles. We're listening to the same music.
Yeah.
All these familiar things that connect us to the East.
Yeah.
And so you grow up that way. So you didn't experience racism growing up, or did you? Like, how was that for you knowing there's majority brown people?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I didn't necessarily experience racism. I would say my racism or my radar of identifying it was more clouded. Like, there were obviously things that happened around me. Like, I think my grandpa took my little cousins to a park and some things were said to him, like, go back to your country, only because he wears a turban. But I feel like growing up around a lot of brown people, you don't necessarily learn to identify those because there's more of you at that point than there is of them.
Yeah.
So you don't hear that as much. And then the white people that I did grow up with were very open to culture. They were just like us. They made the same jokes. We all got along. It wasn't until I was in Mount Royal that I realized, oh, like, I am a minority. And that was a huge realization for me. And I feel like since then, I haven't been able to let that go because you become more aware of it in everywhere you go.
Do you feel like you'll lose some of your confidence when you realize that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to add anything to that?
Well, so you say a white girl complex. I feel like I never had that because of how many brown people I was around. But even then, I was constantly told I was whitewashed. I listened to a lot of rock music. You're still put in your own corner. So I feel like there's also like a layer of ethnic racism there. But even with that, you still felt more a part of the team than you did outside of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can still speak the mother language. You're still traveling back home. You're doing a lot of the customs and things. And I think that's what it is. It's like growing up as children of immigrant parents, we start to realize this is no fault of our parents because they had, in my opinion, they had it harder than us. At least we knew how to assimilate. My sister and I talked about this yesterday.
Yeah.
I said to her, you know, like, how is it that one of my closest friends who's white, I can't tell her how offended and fearful and uncomfortable I am around her. But this other woman, white woman, shows up a couple weeks ago and I could bring her Ruby Hamad's book and tell her about the book and talk about some of this stuff. And she just openly sat there and listened.
Yeah.
And I said, why is that? And my sister's like, it's because it is now our defense mechanism. Now that we're realizing what we were part of. Some of it, I feel like I didn't make it any better because I was like, if you can't beat them, you join them, right? That was my mentality. And so I was part of it. So any of my white friends that want to say, oh, well, you used to do it too. It's like, yes, of course, but I'm trying to grow. I'm trying to recognize that wasn't okay. And I'm trying to find who I am today.
Exactly.
And if you can't be part of that conversation or want to be part of that conversation, that's hard. So I was asking my sister, okay, why is it that this lady I don't know, I can tell her all this, but this really good friend I can't? And she's like, this is what we're learning. We allowed all this to happen. We had it happen to us. We would hide behind the white people. They loved it. All these sorts of things. And now we're learning we weren't really true friends with all of them. Maybe a couple, but not all of them.
Yeah.
We were friends because it was familiar territory to them in the sense that we were doing things that they were Western way things.
Exactly.
So that's familiarity.
Yeah.
And now anytime we meet a new white person, we're putting our boundary up.
Yeah.
And we were she's like, that was you testing. And I was like, what? She's like, that was you testing, saying, moving forward, can I have another conversation with this woman?
Yeah.
And how is she going to handle this information I give her? She put a lot of meaning behind how guilty I've been feeling, that why can't I call up that friend and tell her those things? But this lady I can. And she's like, this is why you can't.
Yeah.
Because now how are you going to undo all that?
Exactly. And sometimes it's so hard realizing that you were friends with this person for so long. And I don't know if you looked past it, you didn't realize, but one day you came to a realization like, oh, I can't have these conversations with this person. And then when you do meet somebody that you can, like I've met somebody through work who I instantly feel like, oh, I can tell them all my problems. They understand. They're not coming from a place of judgment. It's hard recognizing that there's a certain friend that you had these expectations from, that you thought you could be talking to them in that way, but you can't. And this new person, you can. It is really hard.
It is. It's like this grief and loss that you kind of go through. And I do appreciate those folks, those white people out there, that the few that we have in our life that want to be an ally. And I think we can talk about that later. Like, what would we love from our white friends? I don't want anyone listening to feel like we are ganging up on you. But I think that's part of why we're having this talk, is like, we don't have the space to talk about it, because when we do, then we're being really harsh and aggressive. But the reason why we're talking about it is because white people have put us in this box and treated us this way and told us we can't buy those drinks at the club.
Exactly.
We can't work this job because we're a diversity hire, which you're going to get into. And all sorts of these other things that happen, or you don't know anything, or how come your people always do this?
Yeah.
And, it's like, you're like, oh yeah, right. Why is it my people that talk like that? Why is it? Yeah, you're right. We're the worst. We're wrong. And I think we're just trying to get to this place where we're just trying to find our voice. And sorry if we step on your toes while we're doing it, but we're not thinking of you in any bad or good way. We're just finally thinking for ourselves, I think.
Exactly. And I feel like a lot of times we internalize a lot of what happened to us growing up. I would say so I had this one white friend that I've had for a while. We did meet at work a few, I want to say 5-6 years ago, maybe longer. And throughout school, my name is Kajal. For some reason, it's really hard to pronounce, and people will call me Kajal. And I just stopped correcting people. And I remember there was this one teacher who, at the end of the year said, "Why did you never correct me?" And it was at that point where I was like, I don't know. Everybody says my name wrong. It just is what it is. But your name, that's one thing that you have. People should be able to say it better. They can pronounce it. It's not that they can't pronounce it. It's that they don't try.
Yes.
And this one teacher, I just never even corrected him, because I was like, oh, he's just going to be another person who can't pronounce my name.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I recently did this macaroon baking class in Calgary, a few weeks ago with my friend Jessica. And the chef, I suck at baking. And the chef, he acknowledged that I suck at baking to the class. He was like, stop, what are you doing? And I went in, wrote my name on my name tag. It says Kajal. And I wrote the K in handwriting so I can see how it looks like a R. So the entire time he's calling me Rajal. And I never once corrected him. And then so he stopped the class. He was like, what are you doing? Stop. And then he did that twice. And the second time, my friend Jessica, bless her, she was like, oh, no, if you're going to yell at her, use her name correctly. Her name is Kajal. And so she stopped and she was like, no, if you're going to say this to her, at least use her name. Her name is Kajal. And afterwards, I remember, and I was like, why'd you do that? And she was like, no, he should be using your name. Your name is Kajal. It's not Rajal. He's going to talk to you and say that. And that was the first time I realized, people should be able to say my name. My name's not that hard to say. I should be able to correct people. But I stopped, I want to say, in junior high, which is a long time ago.
Yeah. That's a very important story, because I know for us, our names have so much significance and so much meaning. And more, we, the newer generations, present party included, we name our kids not Indian names.
Yeah.
And so those of us that have it comes from so much thought that's put together.
Yeah.
And that is something that I didn't realize and learn until my grandpa actually passed away, because he was part of naming me. Yeah. Prior to that, though, growing up, I was so embarrassed when someone had to say my name. I hated it. I wanted to change my name legally. I didn't know why my parents had to name me Kirandeep Kaur. Like, why? What? Like, can I just be a Karen or like something else? And how dare they name Serena? Because that's an easy one to say, right? Serena had her own problems. No one believed she was Punjabi because she was so light skinned. She didn't, and that's the other thing is the difference of
ethnic racism.
Yeah. How light you are, right?
Yeah.
And how much you don't look your culture.
Yep.
So the name thing, I'm glad you bring that up. There are so many times I will have people coming on here and I can't pronounce their name and they're white people names.
Yeah.
And I always say, like, how do I say this? And every time they have been in awe that I asked.
Yeah.
And we're like, thank you so much. And I'm like, well, I can't have a conversation without knowing your name.
Yep.
We can't move on from there.
Yeah.
Your name is the beginning of this conversation.
It's who you are.
Yeah.
Your name is what identifies you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's those things where people don't make the time or effort or think, why do you have to have that name? Or there was this meme going around. I don't know. I'm sure you've seen it. It's like it was a Muslim name and it was meant to be funny. And I don't know. I didn't find it funny. A lot of people were sending it around and her name, the way you pronounced it, ended up being a really inappropriate sexual thing.
Yeah.
And even Snoop Dogg posted it. And so people are sending it. People are all just trying to be funny. And I know a lot of people are like, calm down, people of color. You don't have a sense of humor.
Gosh.
But it bothered me because I was like, why? Because her name's not Jessica or, Sarah or whatever the names are that are supposed to be easy to say because her name is different than your name. It's not familiar. Now we're making fun of all this.
Yeah.
And can you imagine if we put a meme out there and had whatever white person's name and we're making fun of that?
Yeah.
It would be so different. And I just, sometimes I know I get it. It's for fun or whatever. And maybe that girl is the one that decided to create that meme or whatever. But to me, it's like things like that where it just feels like there's no room for any other voice or culture unless if you are white.
Yeah.
And we are lucky, you and I, because we were born in this country.
Exactly.
We get a little bit of leeway.
Exactly. But even then, the thing that irks me is we can say pterodactyl, but we can't say Kajal. Like, make it make sense. That doesn't work. How does that work?
Pterodactyl. I love that.
And like, look at the way it's spelled. Kajal is spelled how you would sound it out. Like Kajal. It's Kajal. It's such a small name.
Yeah.
But there's so much meaning behind it too. And I feel like the thing is, that made me realize I should honor my name a bit more because it was hard for my parents to even name me that because that goes back into ethnic racism where when my mom had me, I was born, they were like coming up with names and my mom's like, oh, I want to name my daughter Kajal. And she was met with a lot of hatred because that's not a Sikh name. Yeah. That's a Hindu name. And so there was like a lot of things that were said. And so they had to add the name Kulveer in there. So now my name is Kulveer Kajal Mangit. And with that, my entire life, nobody called me Kulveer. Everybody only called me Kajal. It wasn't until I went to Mount Royal when I became Kulveer. That was when people started calling me Kulveer through flying school. Everybody calls me Kulveer. Nobody at work knows my name is Kajal. Everybody just calls me Kulveer. But if you're a close friend and you're calling me Kajal, it's just like, I should have more respect for where that name came from. Yeah. So that's why I'll always appreciate Jessica for that. Yeah. Because you can make fun of my baking skills, but say the right name. Don't call me Rajal.
That was just like her point was exactly like you're going to address this human being here, then address this human being here. Yeah. You're making a personalized comment towards her. So learn the name. Yeah, you're right. We start in the middle of a lot of scenarios or conversations and don't understand how to start at the front or at the beginning of that. And kudos to Jessica for that. That's a great example of being an ally.
Exactly.
Of keeping it cute, funny, but also being like, you know what, buddy, I got your back. Even when you're not thinking about it. Because I would be embarrassed and overwhelmed and like, fuck, I paid all this money. Maybe I should go. I suck at this, whatever. Yeah. This chef is, trying to obviously be some celebrity chef and think he's cool. Why do chefs think they have to be so angry all the time?
Oh my God. But I don't blame him because we were making
I don't blame him. I really suck.
we were making macaroons and we were just putting them onto the tray and you're just supposed to make it round and like you're just supposed to like plop it down. And I don't know why I couldn't even do that. And he's like, your hands are too hot. You can't be a baker. And I'm like, I don't want to be a baker. I know I suck at this. It was like a whole thing where I wouldn't have even once stopped him and like, hey, call me the correct name at least.
No.
So I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a cute story. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about you. So you are a pilot.
Yes. Pilot, not a baker. Yeah, no, I'm a pilot.
Big difference.
Yeah, huge difference.
Yeah. So can you share a bit about how you decided to become a pilot? Like, how did you get to that place?
So I think it was grade 4 or 5 when we originally started learning about aircrafts and how they fly. And then since then, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But then you grow up, life happens. I went to Mount Royal for like business. And I was like Googling. I was like, what can you do without full education?
Yeah.
And then it said pilot. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But I never realized that you become a pilot in Calgary. You just don't think Calgary has flying schools. I don't know why, or at least I never thought it did.
Right.
So then I started looking into it. I saw that there was a school in Calgary. There was multiple schools in Calgary. I booked an intro flight the next day. I went to the intro flight, and as soon as I landed, I was like, when can I get started? And they said, oh, the class actually started today, but we can enroll you and you can start tomorrow. So I started literally the next day. This all happened within not even a week, like 3-4 days.
What was it like that first flight that you did before you landed there and decided to join the school? Like, is that's the first time you were in the cockpit, first time you're sitting up there? Like, what was that experience like?
Oh man, it was so cool. I remember I went back home and I was like, oh my God, I flew a plane today. Like, it was just such an amazing feeling. And then my parents were so happy. And like right away, they were like, oh my God, you should do it. Do it if you want to do it. And so I feel like I was just met with like so much joy that there was no way I couldn't do it. I at least had to give it a try.
Oh my gosh. Like, to me, you're like this big deal celebrity because this is so not common for women in our culture. We're told to sit there, be quiet. Women eat after the men.
Yeah.
All these sort of customs that I think as we're getting older, parents are getting older, they're even learning, oh, there's got to be more equality, all that. But we're taught the way we're taught. We're a woman. You got to be this shy bride all the time, all these sorts of things. And being a pilot, someone that's like flying this big ass plane is never something that you just wouldn't think of it. You, as an Indian woman, you would not go be a pilot. Very few of them. And I also heard from you that this place that you work in aviation with, you're the first Punjabi woman pilot?
So no, because I don't actually fly for the company.
Okay.
There's 3 of us. None of us are flying yet. We all have our pilot licenses. We're pretty much just waiting our returns. So out of one of the 3, we'll be the first. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but it's crazy that this company even has 3 Punjabi females that have their pilot licenses.
That's insane. That there's 2 more of you?
Yeah.
How is there 3? Like, this is,
Yeah. And the most insane part is that one of them, I actually grew up with her. When my parents moved to Calgary, I guess her parents and my parents became friends. And then we hung out a lot growing up. But I feel like I just never realized or noticed her growing up in high school. And then one day I saw her post something on Instagram that she was flying. And then turns out we're at the same flight school as well. And then we like rekindled, we started talking more. And now we're at the same company too. So it's insane that like we've known each other since before elementary.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So we didn't have icebreakers, but I just thought of one. What are some like stereotypes out there about pilot? What are like all the gossip? What do we say about pilots?
Oh, that is the boys club. Pilots, it's the boys club.
Does it feel that
white
way?
Boys club specifically.
White boys club.
Because we only have one Punjabi pilot who's the guy.
Oh, yeah. There you go. There you go. Yeah.
So I have the boys club for sure. That's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah. And are all the instructors mostly male too?
Majority. So when I started at this school, the school pairs you up with an instructor.
Okay.
And so I was paired up with a female brown instructor.
Oh my goodness.
I was like, how is
this
happening?
Bigger community than we think there is.
Yeah. I was like, how is this happening? She's from India. Like, she's like this person that you wouldn't think would be a pilot, but like I'm paired up with her. She's my instructor.
Yeah.
So it was so nice. And then started paying more attention at school. And I noticed, there's like a group of these brown instructors, all from different parts of India. Or there's like one of my close friends, she's Lebanese, she's a pilot. And it was just insane to see that these people are instructors and they're teaching you how to fly the plane.
Yeah.
But they're so underrepresented even then.
Yes, 100%. Because even we're sitting here being like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
This is, so to me, this is a huge celebration. And I really wish today we were getting together to talk about this celebration.
Yeah.
But that's not why we're here. I wanted to acknowledge and take a moment, give you a high five that like it's phenomenal. I feel like Karan Aujla, AP Dylan, all these guys, when they make their music video and they're flying in a private jet, they should have the Punjabi Right here, Kajal, right here. Punjabi pilots flying those planes. Let's get the Punjabi girls out there instead of doing the dancing in our tube tops.
Yep.
We should be flying the planes. So.
I can't even lie. I've reached out to 2 different artists.
Yes.
And I told them both, like, when I'm actually flying for my company.
Yes.
I'm going to message you and we're going to set something up. So
Please.
It's coming. It's coming soon.
There you go.
Yeah.
I can't wait because we need more of that. And just so you know, this is the first place we mentioned this. And I have a rep for these things happening. So here's the next thing that's going to happen right here. So I can't wait.
It's going to happen. It's coming soon.
Totally. Absolutely.
How cool would it be? At my flying school, there's 3 other schools around it, like literally across the street. And from there, I don't know how it originally started, but I started noticing a lot more brown people in aviation. We all started talking and then we had a few dinners. It's like Punjabi pilots that are having dinner together, which I mean, sounds like a small thing, but it's actually a huge thing that we were able to make a community inside this big community where we're so underrepresented, but we were able to find each other and we made this community. And there's a few of them that actually wear turbans. So how cool would it be if in Karan Aujla's music video, there's 2 brown pilots, like one has a turban on and like the other's the like female pilot.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And just even Cartel Contra.
Oh my God.
Right?
Yeah.
Those 2 doing like an all-female
that would be so badass
thing where it's like all the women working. Yeah. Just like AP and them did there with the Brown One Day one. But this is like, you know.
The Brown Kuriyan.
Yeah, Brown Kuriyan. This is part 2 coming back right here.
We need to do it.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, let's do our MFU segment. So what do you want to put your middle fingers up to today?
So I had something totally different in mind. But then on my way here, I decided I was going to go see my grandma first.
Okay.
And then I hop into my car. I'm trying to turn it on. It doesn't start because it's minus 38. So I've never had a dead battery before. I'm super fortunate. I didn't know what to do. Luckily, my mom's Jeep was there, so I had to start that instead. And it didn't even start at the first try. I tried with the remote control. Didn't start. Had to go to it. Finally started. And then I made my way here. So my middle finger for sure goes up to this minus 40 weather.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It's so bad.
It's extreme. Like it's just as bad when it's plus 40, but in the minus 40, it's ridiculous how quick everything freezes and frostbite. I hear ya. It comes every now and then, this weather, for a couple weeks out of the year, but it feels like a couple months.
It does.
Of this. And I'm like, how many more days?
Only a few more days. Yeah. But I've been so fortunate. My car has always started. I've never had any battery problems. And this is the first time. And I didn't even know what to do. So I was like, I need to text my dad and be like, hey, can you teach me?
Yeah. Right? Like how to function?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. All right. Okay. Well, that was a good one. I was also going to throw one out. I wanted to talk about stats.
Okay.
That's what my middle fingers is going up to.
Yeah.
The problem that I have with stats.
Yeah.
So you and I were talking about this beforehand because I do my research and often guests do their preparation. And we were both talking about, okay, like I have some stats. And I was saying to you, like, here's a problem I have with stats. And this is what my middle fingers is going up to, is that the challenge with stats lies in questioning, like, who holds the power to collect them?
Mm-hmm.
Who's collecting them?
Yeah.
And where did this stat come from? What kind of surveys did they use? Yeah. How many people actually answered it? So it says 75% of people. Is it because 3 people answered this? And also, who are these people that answered it? And it becomes so factual. And then we look at those numbers and we think, for example, our topic today is racism. We think, oh, well, Canada's not racist. People in this poll said this thing. And, you know, like my problem always with those educated people that know so much more than I'll ever know, have all these stats, is that you're meeting personal experience with logic. And most times people that don't want to experience the impact of what racism is by hearing these stories will go to the stats, because 70% in numbers looks less lethal. I don't have to cry over it. Yeah. It's not going to hurt my feelings. It's just a number. And I can still interpret it how I want. But when someone shows up like you today to tell me that your personal story, that could cause some impact to me and maybe even make me think about how realistic this is. I don't want that. Let's stop there.
Exactly.
So I just struggle sometimes when we only care about the numbers and the stats and your episode needs more stats. It's like, what stats do we want?
Exactly.
Someone is sitting here telling us their personal story. What more evidence do you want to know that this happens every day?
Yeah.
So that's what my middle fingers is going up to, is this whole, we need statistics so that we can really beef up our story. And I'm going to say that the best way to beef up a story is to share it by being authentic and honest. And this is what's happened to me. And the more we talk about these experiences, maybe the more stats will get out there. Yeah. Because part of the problem is, I'd like to know how many people didn't show up to answer that question. Not many people are going to show up like you did today because it's scary and no one believes you. And half the time you don't even realize someone treated you that way. Exactly. You think it was your fault and all these things you and I have been saying.
Yeah. So I think my thing with stats, or aviation related stats especially, would be out of all of Canada, only 6% of the pilots are female. So that's the stat I focus on is, okay, 6% is female, but then how many is female of color? Mm-hmm. So if you were to take just my company, for example, and these are just rough numbers, let's say we have 200 pilots, and I just went to this event with my company for Girls in Aviation in Red Deer, where we're trying to get more girls involved in aviation. I was like one of the only brown people there, or the only people of color. There weren't that many, but there were a lot of girls, which is nice. So for that, one of our managers actually sent out the stat. So the industry standard, or like throughout Canada, it's around 6%. But in my company, and we're super proud of it, is 10%.
Wow.
Which is higher than what it is in all of Canada.
Right.
But if you were to break it down, let's say there's 200 pilots, 20 of them are females, 2 people are female of color.
Yeah.
That's the stat that I want to know. Why is it that only 10% is female, and why is it that there's almost no female of color represented? Mm-hmm. It's insane.
It is. It is. Why do you think?
Well, I feel like it's not that there's a lot of stigma. So going on stats, India has the highest number of female pilots. They introduced a program in 2018 for women in aviation. So it's not like we can say there's not enough brown female pilots. That's not what it is, but I don't know. It's harder to get in the industry for you if you're colored and if you're a female.
Yeah. That's the piece that, where do we find the answer to that? Why is it that way? I think some of it is cultural, we're again taught. I just think those are interesting numbers to bring up and say, okay, like, what's the story in this?
Yeah.
How is it this way? Is it that we're not bringing women of color into our company?
Yep.
Is it that women of color or women in general are not interested in doing this? And why is that? What are the barriers that are getting in the way? And it's like hard to know the answer.
Yeah.
But definitely from our own biases and our own experiences as women of color, I think there's lots of answers in that of, that's not something that, even, like I said, even for me, when I hear you are a pilot under the age of 30, it just blows my mind, because I've never in my life met a female pilot. Every now and then you're on a WestJet flight and you're like, yay, it's a woman. And then someone makes a stupid comment about, women drivers, right? And you're like, okay. But then let alone, like, never in my life have I met a woman of color that is a pilot.
Yeah, super rare.
So rare.
Yeah, if the average for Canada is 6%, then how many of that is actually people of color, or like women of color in this case? Almost nobody. So that's why I was so surprised when I went to my school and right away I had a female, like a brown female instructor. Yeah. Where else do you see that?
No. And I think your story is going to help us come back to this number too, because I think I have some questions coming up, but I think maybe this is a good time to get into your story. One thing I want to just come out and say before we get into it too is, again, just a pause and a reminder to people listening, because I don't know on the other end, unless if people send feedback, how they feel about a conversation like this. Despite some strides like Western society has tried to do, I think the Western society has yet to confront, again, you mentioned this too, like the conscious and unconscious biases against women of color. These biases of women that we all carry, and you even mentioned we carry these biases that are shaped by years of socializations into a system that is fundamentally racist and sexist. So in order to understand these conscious and unconscious biases, or these gaps in these stats that you're sharing, and the damages that they all cause, as well as how they are so common that they remain invisible to many, is again going back to the point that we need to hear the stories that bring these biases to the forefront.
Exactly.
So this is what I wanted to say before we get into your story is, as a woman of color, thank you for stepping up and representing our people, women of color that just don't know where to go, how to have these conversations. This is a huge thing. So I would love to know through you, what motivated you to come forward and talk about your story today?
So I feel like I was struggling with it a lot. At first, the only people I told what was going on at work was my parents. And then I told a few friends. That same friend, Jessica, she also does HR. So I reached out to her and I was like, hey, this is how my company handled it. Like, what are your opinions? So I started speaking to a few people. But even then, a lot of times the people that I was speaking to they've dealt with the same thing at work, or it's happened to them before. But nobody really understands what's going on until you're in those shoes. So it did take me a while to be able to talk about it. And then me and my mom were talking about the podcast that you started. My mom was like, oh, Karen, she was telling me she's lost a lot of friends since she started doing this. And I was like, oh, I have too. And then from there, she was like, you should reach out to her. And it was so funny because I was like, I feel like I don't know enough English. And it's insane because my mom's like, what? You were born here. Yeah. You know English. And I'm like, no, I feel like I don't have the vocabulary to be able to discuss this in the way that I want to. I can't present it the way that I want to. And I was like, you know what? She's right. Like, I should be able to do it. I do know English. What is this?
Yeah.
So then I messaged you and it was so exciting that you were like, okay, yeah, I want to hear your story. Let's get started.
Yeah.
And so I feel like my mom is the one who gave me the push to actually reach out to you.
That's amazing. Good for your mom. Your mom is a woman that immigrated here very young.
Yeah.
And so she's one of those, she's very young herself too. However, you and I are those children of immigrant parents. Yeah. So she's trying to make changes and hopefully open doors that she didn't have open for you. That's what I hear a mother with a daughter here saying, hold on a second, let's get this out there. Let's talk about it. Yeah. And even she's mentioned to me too that she's like, I don't have the vocabulary. I don't know what to say when these people walk circles around me day in and day out. And it's true because I don't even know. And like I said, you and I were born and raised here.
Exactly.
Sometimes I don't have I have white friends that correct me all the time. Tell me I said this word wrong and that word wrong, and it's like, fine, I was born and raised here. I had education here in Canada, but this isn't my primary culture.
Exactly.
I also look at my house. I'm always like, I was born and raised in Canada, but my household was India. Okay. Yeah. I grew up in India.
Yeah.
So I'm with you too. I don't have all the vocabulary. I don't always say all the things right, but you know what? We're going to do our best today.
Exactly.
And I got you and you got me. And I think that's what matters. So we're going to talk about this. So, okay. So why don't we start with walking us through your experience with racism in the workplace?
So in aviation specifically, starting out, since I did have these brown instructors that were around me, I feel like a lot of times, like, I didn't fully grasp that I was minority, even in this. And then going forward to my company, I had the opportunity to work with these amazing people. The manager who hired me, our interview was great. Everything was great. If there was Kool-Aid, I would have drank it. Like, I was living, breathing. This company was amazing. I loved it there. A few months in, I got a promotion. And I didn't hesitate. I took the promotion and I was like, okay, it's going to be great. The company's great. Mm-hmm. And like first day, I was told I was a diversity hire. And I was like, how did I come from this company where I was ready to drink the Kool-Aid to a different department where I instantly on day one hated it? Mm-hmm. I was like, no, like this isn't what I wanted. This isn't the same company. How can I have a manager who was so amazing and now all of a sudden have this management that sits back and doesn't do anything? So it really did suck that this happened on the first day, but I felt like I couldn't necessarily say anything to the manager who did give me the promotion. And he's like this super amazing person. He would have understood, but I didn't want to let him down because he's giving me this promotion. How am I going to be like day one? Oh, I actually hate it. So I think I cried a lot that day. And then from there on, it was just one thing after another. And it was specifically with one person who I was even warned about. It's the fact that this person came with a warning that, oh, he has a tendency to say like these racist, sexist things. Just ignore him. He's young. He's not young. He's 22. I'm sorry, but like at 22, you're not that young. You know better. But constantly they would say these things and they'd be like, oh, but he's young. He doesn't understand yet. And so he would get away with a lot of what he was saying. So I started with like the whole diversity hire. That same instructor that I had she's a Lebanese woman, person of color, instructor, female pilot, all of those things. So she's the one who brought me into the company, and they used her in a commercial for like, oh, we're hiring, come work here. This is the community. So she was used in that commercial, and he said to me, oh, like, why did they pick her? We have other guys. Like, we didn't need to use a girl. And then, okay, that's one thing. But then he even said we didn't need to use a brown girl. Like, there's white girls there too. You put her in so many boxes right there, and you don't even know her. So there was just like a few things. He would say these like microaggressive things. He would say stuff like, oh, you're from the Northeast is ghetto, it's so dangerous there. We work by the airport. That is the Northeast. And it was just, he wouldn't acknowledge what he was saying was wrong. Or he would be like, all brown people are drug dealers. Just like a bunch of stereotypes. And he would constantly do it, or he would constantly bring up Surrey. And I was born in Surrey. And he knew this too. He would bring up Surrey in a lot of conversations for some reason. And I even told him, I am from Surrey. Like, I'm from Surrey. And he'd be like, oh, Surrey is this, Surrey is that. And I even told him so many times, like, hey, I know you think this way, but have you actually been there? He's never been to Surrey, of course. He's just talking about the stereotypes. He's never actually been there. So that happened a few times, but that continued to happen because every time we would have a flight that was going to Vancouver, he would be like, oh, Surrey this, Surrey that. And I would be like, dude, how did you forget that I'm from Surrey again? And he would be like, oh, no, you're not from Surrey. It was like consistently that he would forget that I was from Surrey. That's how it mostly got started. So my company did this thing where, since it's a private jet company, we do private aviation. If one side of the trip is going empty, like if we're going empty to Vancouver, you can put your friends on that. So I put my friends on this one flight to Palm Springs, and I've never even told this friend that this happened. And this is like what started a lot of it for me. So my friend goes with her boyfriend, they go Palm Springs, and I'm like at a cafe studying, and my phone starts blowing up, and they're like, oh, this person is saying this. He's saying your cousins are on the plane, they're drinking, they're posting pictures of themselves drinking, they're trashing the plane, they're rock starring the plane, they're doing this, they're doing that. And I was like, what the fuck? So I checked my friend's story. Dude, she posted a bottle of Fiji water outside, and you can see that she's on like a plane, and it's a bottle of Fiji water. And so I like messaged him, and I was like, hey, what the fuck? And he's like, no, I just wanted to let you know because they're not allowed to be drinking on the plane. Oh, they're not drinking on the plane. Like, this isn't what they're doing. And he's like, I heard from somebody else, one of the pilots. Like, he was like talking in circles because he couldn't openly say where he heard this from. And somehow he heard this from another Punjabi pilot, the only Punjabi pilot in our company, who was like, oh, these brown people are in the plane drinking. They weren't. And so I started this huge thing, and then I was switched rotations. So we work 4 on, 4 off. I switched rotations so I wouldn't see him again. But I kept hearing this is what he's saying. And the whole time, my friends that are sitting there are telling me, hey, he's saying this, he's saying all this. But nobody actually stood up for me. Or I feel like maybe they did, but I feel like nobody stood up for me. They were just telling me like this happened. But did anybody try and be like, hey, stop? So that happened, and then we were speaking about it, and the person that I was speaking to decided, he was like, this story you should be telling to HR, like you should bring this up with HR. He shouldn't be able to bully you and say these things. And so he was like, yeah, like you should tell HR. And I was, hey, like, no, I know exactly what HR is going to say. They're going to think it's no big deal. Like, he was just saying these remarks, like it's nothing. And so I already knew that going in, and I told him I don't want to be problematic. I don't want to go to HR. We talked about it, and I said this 3 times that I didn't want it to go to HR. He still went to HR behind my back. And the way he went to HR isn't how I would have. So the way he worded it, I had no control over. And he like took away my voice, or at least that's how I felt. I felt like he went behind my back, took away my voice. He's telling the story. I don't even know how he's explaining the story. So he does that, and then I get called into HR. It's my new manager from the promotion. So I have these 2 managers. It's them and HR. And so we're sitting there. We're going over what happened. We have a few HR meetings. And then they call me in and they're like, hey, we don't think he was racist after everything that happened. And like that was the breaking point for me, where as soon as they said, we don't think he's racist, my jaw was shaking and I was like, what the fuck? And so as I just like, I don't even know what came over me. I was like, I find it really funny that the 3 white people sitting across from me are telling me that they don't think that was racist.
You said that?
Yeah, I said that.
Good for you.
And then
Wow.
I looked directly at our HR lady and I was like, we have colored HR people. Why weren't they used in this? And they told me you should go outside and take a walk. I get it. I am crying, but you don't tell somebody that as soon as they call you out. So I just never went back in.
Mm-hmm.
What am I supposed to do? Go back in and be like, oh, I'm done crying. I'm done playing the victim?
Mm-hmm.
No. So I just didn't go back in. And then we continued on like that. And so his rotation and my rotation, there's like a lot of, I would say there's a lot of friends. So you hear a lot. You'd be like hearing, oh, he's saying this. He's saying you're bullying him. He's saying you went to HR. You made it a big deal. You did this. You did that. I'm the one calling him racist, even though before I met this person, I was given a warning. If somebody is giving you a warning about somebody, it's because they've already done stuff.
Mm.
And so then I found out that I wasn't the first person to call him out. Other people called him out previously. Another white person called him out and nothing happened. So even after that, nothing happens. And then we just like, sorry, my voice is like cracking.
Yeah.
We just like continue on. And then I'm like hearing that he's saying a bunch of things. So my company decided they were going to put out a respect in workplace training. And this was directly because of what happened with me in HR. And so they put out this training 6-7 months later. And this training was so stupid. It's so stupid. And instantly you hear how stupid it is because everyone around you they're forcing us to do this 2-hour training to stop being racist. Nobody's even racist in this company. They're like, there's no issues. We didn't need this training.
You're there in this training when this is being said around you?
Yeah. It's not even just employees. The managers are saying this. The managers that I previously worked with, one literally said, they didn't need to put this out. This is common sense. Well, if it was common sense, then we wouldn't be needing to have this conversation. Mm-hmm. But it's the way that they address the entire situation. They tell me, oh, that's not racism. We'll put out this respect and workplace training for everyone to do. You can't skip it. This is the only training in the company that you can't like skip the video. You have to watch it. It's 2 hours long. Everyone's talking shit about the training. And then I'm being told, oh, this was only to shut you up. What? I didn't go in there and say, make this 2-hour long training so everybody realizes what racism is, because they didn't do anything about it. The company never acknowledged, hey, yeah, we have problems. Instead, they told me we don't have problems. That wasn't racist. That's not what racism is. So the company didn't even acknowledge that there was a problem. They just put out this training to shut me up. Like, basically, that's what everyone was saying. And somehow even that got turned around to the person who was originally saying these things, that he said this was because of him. They put the training out because of him, that I ruined his image, that he's not going to be a pilot at the company because of this. There was like a lot of things being said around the training as well. And I do understand, but they approached it in the wrong way. You can't just put out a training. You have to be like, we have these problems in the company. I shouldn't be hearing managers saying, oh, we don't even have these problems in the company. This is common sense. Don't do this. Don't be a bully. But it's not common sense because the people sitting right beside you are the ones that are doing it. And we're in the same room.
Can I say something to that for a second? This diversity training, like if I have to hear those 2 words again, seriously, to me, they are just the same as my MFU about these stats. I'm telling someone one day this story about a racist encounter I had. And the person's response to me is no empathy, not even, I don't even know how to respond.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all you have to say. Sometimes the best thing to do is just say nothing and just be silent and give nods like you're listening.
Yeah.
You know, active listening. None of that was said, but they felt uncomfortable with the story because they were also white. So their response was, have you ever done this diversity training? Or maybe this racist person can be offered this diversity training. And I think a lot of times white people's intention is great. When we get into task, which is do a training, go to a 2-hour thing. Now it's going to be on your HR record. And when the audits come in and whoever comes to audit us will look and say, oh, this person did this training. Great, great, great.
Yeah.
We all did it. We put it away. And it's like you go do these trainings and yet I want to tell you so many things you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And I think how come if we're going to do a diversity training, should we not have 2 hours of personal stories then? Because you can't teach people to be compassionate and mindful and these things that they tell us to do. Genuine empathy. You can't teach that to people. People have to figure that out for themselves. And if they don't know how to do it, then okay, that's going to be an issue. Where is sharing people's stories? Like nowhere in this whole story so far have I heard any validation.
No.
I would imagine this process you've been in has been isolating.
It has, yeah. Because your whole team, so at this point on my team, I'm the only person of color. Or there's one other person, but he's like very, very will not admit that he's a person of color type of person. So I'm like basically the only person of color that this is happening to in our entire team at this point. When I first started, I was the only Punjabi person. My company doesn't have that many people of color in general. So this is when I started noticing, like, every room I stepped in, I was the only person of color. So it wasn't even just the racism. It was the bullying when nobody was listening. Everybody else has stepped away, and he turns to me and he says, I would say Happy International Women's Day to you, but women don't do shit. But me saying, that includes your mom, was wrong. But him saying that to me, uncalled for.
They told you that, dude, so many women have noted that they are reprimanded. They are told they're out of line. HR pulls them in because of their response to the bully, the racist person, or what.
And the whole part, the HR, they didn't even look into everything outside of the one situation. So the only situation that they cared about was, were her cousins actually drinking on a private jet? So
that they can fire you.
No, exactly. And the thing is, that's nowhere, it's not even written in the rules. If the pilots, okay, so my biggest issue is he's saying, oh, they were taking pictures. As soon as we got there, I walked them with the pilot to the jet. The pilot said, hey, let's stop for pictures. The pilot is telling me it's okay, so I'm taking their pictures. And then how did that get twisted? Or how is it that instead of focusing on all of the other situations, HR decided we're only going to focus on the one situation and see were her cousins drinking?
Which was your fault because you're the one that's wrong in this.
Yeah.
How, and I'm just trying to figure this out for myself too, like understand the impact it is for a person of color, a woman of color in particular, experiencing this level of discrimination every day. And we haven't even got to what you're actually what your internal dialogue is through this. We haven't even got there yet. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So we're going to get there. So you're dealing with this. And the part of the whole story is let's focus on the part that could possibly label her as the problematic part. So then all this other stuff will have to go away because it'll discredit you. Yeah. It's systemic socialization. That is how our courts work. That is how our schools are built. Yeah. It is off of settler colonization beliefs and ways. And we have not changed any of that. No. So even when we want to recognize these experiences we're having, we don't have the legal system. We don't have the policies. We don't have these procedures in place that can support us because everything backs up everyone else but us if we're in this situation.
Exactly.
How do you stop talking about it? Because this is what you hear from people is you're still talking about this. Yeah. Why are you talking?
Exactly.
It's
she can't
done.
Just drop it.
Like why can't you
let it go?
So Kajal, answer that question. Why won't you just drop it?
Because it's not something that just stopped. It's still actively happening. It's not like, oh, HR went, they did this. But it's the hearing, I'm not at work. But getting the text messages, hey, he's talking about you again. He's saying you're a bully. It's the constant telling me what he's saying. And to some extent, I don't need to be told the thing he's saying about me. Yeah. What he says about me is his business.
That's right.
But it's the fact that I can't even be on my days off and not be getting these text messages. Oh, he's saying this. He's saying this about brown people. At some point, I want to scream and be like, leave me alone. Like, I'm not even there. I can't. You're telling me this, but are you defending it? No, you're literally what are you doing just about texting me that this is happening, but nobody is going out there and defending me. Nobody is saying, hey, maybe you should stop. Like, she's not even in this room right now. You should stop. But like, my biggest thing is that I don't expect him to do that or anybody else because I know at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to be there for myself. Yes. I can't expect them to be there for me. But it's the fact that HR ignored every single thing. And I even told him, I'm like, why is it that this guy comes with a warning? And so then you find out, so our company is a relatively small company. It's private aviation, super small. his grandparents were one of the first clients at the company. So he has ties. And so I called them out in HR as well. And I'm like, how come he's so protected? Like, there's so much favoritism. He can do a million things, and not just to me, but to other people, and he gets away with it.
It's very difficult when we bring up these scenarios, and in particular, like, you're talking about something in the workplace.
Yeah.
So you're supposed to be protected in the workplace.
Yeah.
And there are supposed to be policies and procedures in place to protect all employees against discrimination.
Exactly.
Even the government of Canada launched last year something called REP. It's like a restorative employee program. They haven't actually started it, I think.
Yeah.
This is an idea, so I don't know if they will, to help minorities and visible minorities, people of color, when there has been this racial experience at work, because well, the hope is that people are recognizing that, again, we respond in a tasky way.
Yeah.
And so when you break your arm, you know to go to the doctor and get the cast. When you are getting comments at you that aren't physically hurting you, it is so hard for people, just like mental health. It's so hard for people to see that if it's not physical.
Yeah.
If he was throwing something at you, if he was hitting you, then okay. But now there is, you know, your word against his.
Exactly.
When there's all this evidence, all this piece, we can do things out of kindness.
Yeah.
We know what it's like to be treated that way, and we don't want to respond that way. But here's the kicker. It doesn't matter how you respond.
It doesn't.
Aren't you now the bully, and aren't you the aggressor now? Isn't that what people are pinning you as now?
And the worst part is HR didn't even tell him I wasn't the one who took it to HR.
Yeah.
They just let him think that I turned around and I snitched on him. This is what I'm like. I'm being labeled as a
discomfort.
snitch.
That's probably the only time a white person may kind of sort of understand what it is like to have your color be brushed. But the thing is, a lot of white people have to understand is you are part of the settler colonization history.
Exactly.
And even though you didn't do it, your family's generations removed, your race decided that race is how we were going to look at people.
Yep.
So now years and years, generations later are like, well, I never did that. And it's like this entitlement or this lack of connection again, because the impact's not there.
Exactly.
Ancestors and all that comes back to that. And that privilege is always going to be there.
Exactly.
We're always fighting or bumping up against it. And I think the difference when people are like, why are you always talking about it now, is because we're starting to find our voice when people of color like Ruby, who I reference, and other people that we look to out there have been doing a lot of work to pave the way for us to have a voice.
Yeah.
And nowhere in this story are you allowed to truly grieve what's happening.
No, exactly. And that's why I said earlier that I felt like my voice was taken away from me, because despite me telling this third coworker that I don't want him to take this to HR, he said, no, like, this is what their job is. They're supposed to deal with this. And I do understand to some extent, because he's never actually dealt with this. He's never seen it before. And for him, it was like, it made sense. He's like, no, this is a big issue. You need to go to HR. And so I know he did it from like a place of caring and a place of like, he didn't want me to feel like this. And he even said that. But then right away, you just took my voice from me. Why can't I speak about this the way I want to? Why is it that despite me saying no to you, you feel like you have to take it? Mm-hmm. And even then, it's like, why? He's another white man. Why does he get to do that? That's not fair. And then for HR to not even tell the original person that, hey, she's not the one who brought this up. Somebody else did. I feel like all of it was super unfair. And like, it wasn't even just that these things were being said. It was also the way that it was handled. So now, after this, I tell HR, like, oh, we have colored people. Why weren't they used? I bump into this HR lady, I want to say like 2 weeks later, in the kitchen, and she ignores me. And I'm like, I say hi. It's common courtesy. We work in an office. I say hi, ignores me, walks past me. So
this is your HR rep.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be a neutral party.
Yeah.
That's HR. That's human resources. They're representing all people that work there.
And the most unfortunate part is that throughout this entire thing, I never once... It wasn't that I didn't feel comfortable with my original manager who brought me into the company, because I really did, and he's actually a really nice person. I didn't want to let him down, so I continued to let people walk all over me.
You've said this twice. I wrote this down earlier. I didn't want to be problematic, and I didn't want to let him down.
Yeah.
Can we unpack that a little bit? You just got attacked you're going through abuse.
Yeah.
This is racism, but I just imagine your child or you are getting physically abused, if that's going to help people understand racism better. You just got attacked.
Yeah.
You have no way of addressing your wounds or dealing with this. And your first thought is, I don't want to be problematic because this man over here was nice to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah. When you put it like that, it sounds so silly. And I realized later.
It's not silly. It makes sense. It's it's disheartening.
So the reason why I felt like I didn't want to let him down is because aviation is hard enough to get into. He brought me as a low-hour pilot he created this whole department, first of all. This wasn't even a department that was already there. He created it, and he let me and this one other person who I went to school with. We worked together at the school as well because I got a job at my school. And he let us in. We're both people of color, low-hour pilots, and he's telling us, hey, work here for like a year and a half. I'm going to put you on the jet. We skipped so many parts of the struggle that is being a pilot because right away we're being told we're going to be put on a private jet. So I feel like I owe him so much because here I am with 300 hours and the company doesn't even look at people who have less than like 1,500 hours. So much that goes into it. And he recognized that I was doing well. And he said, here's a promotion. It came with a huge raise. And I'm like, okay, so he trusts me enough to be like, hey, you can do more than just this department. We want you to spread your wings. He supported me so much that when he gave me the promotion and day one, I hated it. I felt like I couldn't tell him. Mm-hmm. He's so high up in the company too that I was like, no, like there's just no way that this is the same company because here I am working under him for multiple months and I'm loving every single day of it. Before I had retail jobs where I would wake up and cry and be like, Mom, can I quit today? Mm-hmm. I never once felt like that in this job. I felt so valued. I felt like everything I was doing was recognized. Like I felt so good. I never wanted to tell him like, hey, I'm having these problems. Because the way I was looking at it is, what if he thinks if I can't handle it now, how am I going to handle it when I'm flying the plane? And like that is stressful in itself. So I just didn't want to come across as somebody who couldn't deal with problems or couldn't deal with the stress. So that was one side of it. And then I didn't want to come across as problematic because if I'm problematic in the office, who's to say I'm not problematic when I start flying and interacting with other pilots? So I just didn't want to be labeled as problematic and I didn't want to disappoint anyone. So I never went to him. I just dealt with it myself, let it happen. Even though the people I was meeting were saying, you should tell him. But I just never wanted to. I didn't want to be that person. So yeah, it continued happening. A lot of things were continuing to be said. That we're growing as a company, so we got a new office. Moving into that, a lot of things were happening, and on our one-to-ones, a lot of things were brought up. And it wasn't just me, but this new person who was just hired into the company. She's like one of those white people that you feel like you can tell anything to. She really understands. And I felt like she always had my back. So she knew exactly what was happening. And then she said a lot during her one-to-one. So then I felt like she opened the door for me to be able to openly talk. So before that, I would have been like, oh, company's great, this, that, having a good time. But because she did that right before me, and her meeting was almost an hour long, so I was like, okay, she probably unpacked a lot in there. And I was like, now I'm going to go in there and I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to say to my manager what I feel like I need to say. She didn't like it, of course. So that's the worst part, is that to my face, she acted like she really understood. And she was like coming from this place of compassion. And I was like, compassionate back, because this is her first time being a manager. And I understand that that's really hard. Mm-hmm. And she's trying to do her best. And it's not easy that like your first time being a manager and you're like suddenly thrown into like this race fight. And so I was like sympathizing with her, and I thought she was sympathizing with me, and we mentioned a lot. And I even told her my interaction with HR afterwards and how the HR rep pretty much ignored me. And she's like, oh, well, you don't know her. She's a good person. Mm-hmm. And I was like, of course you're going to say she's a good person and that I don't know her. And she told me like, oh, I shouldn't have like these feelings towards her. And I was like, okay. But she did just brush me off afterwards. So I was like, okay, let that go. She said, if you want change, you have to fight for it. And I said, it's 2023. I'm like, these are common sense things. I shouldn't have to fight for it. And I'm like, I told her, I don't want to be problematic. This isn't what I want. I'm like, I don't want to come to this company and have to fight for my place in it. I just want to have a place. I want a seat at the table. And it's not like there's not enough seats. We're hiring pilots like crazy. Our company has grown so much since I've been there. It's not like we're going to turn around tomorrow and stop hiring pilots. That's not what this is. So I shouldn't have to fight for it. And my manager shouldn't be telling me that I had to fight for it. So that was what really set me off. After that, I did reach out to the original manager who hired me, like the really, really nice man. Yeah. That was really bad too. So I messaged him, and I could tell in the way he was messaging me, he was super excited. So he must have thought I was done all my training. And that's originally where my mind went. And so I was like, oh, okay, let me bring you coffee. So I went on my days off, I went and I had a talk with him. I went into his office and he's super excited. And I felt that felt like a gut punch, because I'm not coming in here to tell you, hey, let me fly. Let's go. And so I sat down, and then just seeing the way he was interacting with me, I was like, this is not the conversation you or I want to have. And instantly his face dropped. And I explained everything that was happening, and he was super upset. And he was, why didn't you tell me earlier? Why didn't you tell me while this was happening? And I told him how I felt super unsupported by my management. And he said, you have my support. If you're going into an HR meeting, he's like, call me. I will be there for you. And he said a bunch of things, and he really did support me. And he said everything that I needed. He validated me in every single way. And it was him prying as well, because I told him, I'm only going to say surface level stuff. I'm not looking to cause bigger problems. And I did keep repeating that. And he said, you're not, he's like, Kavir, you're not a snitch. He's like, just tell me. And so I told him what was happening. He told me he's had problems with this person before. The other pilots have had problems with this person. And he did say if he was management on the role that I'm in now, it wouldn't be like this. And he openly said, if he had the authority, he would go in there and instantly fire this person. And he was super upset that wasn't what happened. So that made me feel so much better, because I felt like I wasn't wrong about the company. There's good leadership in the company. It just is super unfortunate that not all of the management styles meet. Why do we have these core values and actions for the company that we bring up all the time, but half of the management doesn't meet those or actually understand those? So it was eye-opening at the same time that I do have this person who supports me, and he said he would open a whole new department for me. He could go back to being my manager. And he said sorry. My current manager never once said sorry. And he's saying sorry that this is happening to me and that he put me in this position. And I feel like the part that really got to me was that I was telling him I felt like I did something wrong and that this was punishment and it wasn't actually a promotion. And he was super upset that that's how I felt, that he was actually rewarding me. He saw that I had more potential than what I was currently doing and I could do bigger things. And so for him to hear that, I feel like it really did affect him too, that he's giving me this and I'm saying if I felt like it was a punishment. Mm-hmm. It did. And I'm still in the other department and I still feel like it's a punishment. It's hard to let that go because of how vastly different the management styles are.
Because it hasn't been dealt with. How do you let something like that go when those that brought it on and now it's in the company's hands? Because at the end of the day, it's not up to the employee anymore to rectify this. It's up to the employer to rectify this. And you know, what's so sad is when I hear you talking, I just imagine a similar scenario in that it's a little tiny child who is getting the shit kicked out of them. Yeah. They're getting abused physically. Yeah. A little tiny helpless child. And that little tiny child has to go say sorry to the person that is beating the crap out of them. Yep. And that little tiny child has to take all of the blame. Yep. And that little tiny child has to deal with feelings that they don't even know are called guilt. Exactly. And feelings of having no one. Exactly. And at the same time, that little child isn't even dealing with the fact that they are bleeding everywhere. Yeah. And honestly, out of this whole story thus far, the thing that's just really, I think, bringing a lot for me and a lot of connection is I don't want to be problematic.
Yeah. Because
you did nothing to bring this on.
Yeah.
Yet you automatically feel like you are the problem. And you have all the people of color that have experienced this standing behind you right now, knowing what that is like.
Yeah.
It's like constantly feeling like gaslighting.
Yep.
You did this. You somehow brought it on. And I just want to know, like, outside of talking to this manager, outside of talking to the people at work, what are the internal conversations? What do you tell yourself when you leave an HR meeting like that? When you leave the kitchen where the HR rep doesn't look at you? When the people that you're working around think you're a problem?
Yeah.
What are those internal conversations you're having with yourself on the way home in the car or on the way to work?
I can't even tell you how many times I've cried. But it feels like you have to put yourself back into a little box. Like, you can't openly express how you feel, because if you do, oh, she's causing more problems. Oh, she's still stuck on this. Oh, like it's just everything. You can't say anything because you're being told, why aren't you moving on? You can move on if it stopped happening, but the fact that it continues to happen, how are you supposed to move on? But nobody looks at me and says, hey, how are you doing? But everybody looks at him and says, hey, how are you doing? Sorry this happened to you. Your character's, now everybody's looking at you like you're racist, like you did something wrong. So after all of this happened with my manager, not the original manager, but the manager I have currently, saying you need to fight for it. So I told her, I'm like, okay, I want to have a mediated conversation, because this entire time they separated us right away. We never had a conversation amongst each other. So I told her, like, I want a mediated conversation. And she said, okay, I'll arrange that. So they called in a third-party HR company, which I'm glad that they did. And the fact that this time I was given a colored HR person and she instantly knew what I was saying, and she didn't like victimize me. She valued what I was saying, and she made me feel heard. So now I'm finally at this place where like somebody is giving me empathy, or they're saying, yeah, we understand what's happening. How can we get to the bottom of it? And it had to be a third-party HR person.
Well, and it sounds like also you needed to have permission from someone to deal with this.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, well, they separated us right away. We couldn't talk. So every time I would hear something, it would be like through text, like he's saying this. And obviously vice versa. I'm not trying to play victim and say I never said stuff about him. I was so frustrated. So obviously I was saying stuff too. I'm not in no way saying that but that's like victim mentality.
What are you? No, you just caught yourself. And I want to know what you were just about to say. I'm in no way saying what.
Like, I'm not saying, the thing is obviously I said stuff too. It's not like, but it's so hard because I didn't ask for somebody to be racist to me. It happened, and I feel like I could have dealt with it better too. But what
would you have done different?
It's not that I'm not forgiving him, but even me, I played into it where I was sympathizing with him rather than validating how I felt. In the third-party HR meeting, I made it mostly like I didn't want to come across as a bully. We sat there and she let us speak our side of it, and his side, and I never looked at it from his side. His side is, this person just joined our department who is going to go flightline before he is. And he's a pilot too. So we're all low-hour pilots, and he knows that my door is open. Like, I have an open door, and when I'm ready, I can go. Whereas with him, he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that connection with the person who hires the pilots, because the original manager is the person who hires the pilots. I have a great relationship with him. And going into a new department and everybody knowing you have a great relationship with the person who's hiring the pilots, I can see how they would look at me as a threat. So right away, he told me in the HR meeting that he saw me as competition. And that's when I understood, okay, like I can see where it was coming from. And I told him, like, I've never looked at you as competition. And I explained it to him the best way that I could. And it was simply because it's a white boys club. He's a white boy. I'm not competition because our company has 10% females. 2 of them are females of color. Where's the competition? How are you viewing me as competition? And I never viewed him as a threat or competition. So for him to say that to me, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but just because I have a connection with the person who's hiring the pilots doesn't give me an upper hand. So for him, when he said that, then I understood why he was calling me a diversity hire, which there's so much negativity around that word, like diversity hire. It's not that they're lowering their standards to hire people of color. That's not what it is. We work just as hard. I worked just as hard as the next person to get my pilot license. We did all the same training. It's not like suddenly the standard was lowered for me. Mm-hmm. That's not what that is. So for him to call me a diversity hire, I get where he's coming from, but that wasn't what it was. And so...
Yeah, but where is he coming from? He's being threatened by a person of color being up for the same job. That demographic, that us being of color...
Yeah.
Automatically, when we keep getting put in that box, then all of our credit is discredited because it's, now all of the hard work, all that stuff that you're sitting there defending yourself for, which you absolutely have no reason to, by the way. You have no reason to sit here and say, I work just as hard. Yeah. You know how hard you work. Yeah. But the fact that you have to say that is his problem. This, you sitting here, is you fighting.
Yeah.
That's the fight that we have, which is trying to constantly prove to people that I deserve the seat at the table.
Yeah.
The fact that you don't want to go and be a problem or make your manager look bad when you're being treated that way is often what children do to protect the caregiver who abuses them.
Yeah.
How long from the incident and it continuing to go on to that manager who you emailed and brought the coffee to and met with, where he apologized? How long was that?
We could say about like 9 months.
So almost a year.
Almost a year.
Before you hear someone from your place of work that you love going to and you want to be part of this saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How fucking hard is it for any of those other people that were there to say, I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Why is it so hard for people to say, I'm sorry, when we say, you made me feel this way?
Yeah. And that's what pisses me off, is that, like, why am I sympathizing with him? Because he saw me as a threat. I never once looked at him as a threat. I knew all the doors would be open for him, but I'd have to push harder. So for him to even say, oh, like, I saw you as competition. And when I told him that I didn't see him as competition, I knew that he had advantages over what I do. There's not a single Punjabi female pilot in my company currently. There's 3 of us sitting on the sidelines ready to go. We're not actually flying the planes. We're on the sides. One is cleaning lavatories. Me and the other one, we're in the office. We're not flying. And so for him to even view me as competition, it was, okay, are you serious?
Yeah.
Do you not?
That's just a cover up to give you fuel and permission to behave that way.
Exactly.
To say, well, I can justify these white privilege feelings over here that I'm feeling a bump up against by saying, hold on a second, my privilege matters more. And this is just an excuse.
Yeah.
Everyone knows you have no competition. But maybe before I ask the next question, do you want to continue? Is there more to the content of the story?
Yeah. So in that HR meeting, I brought up, so we had open conversation. We spoke and he told me his side. I told him my side. And then I was like, okay, like, there are a few things I want to address. Why did you say this? And like the Women's Independence Day, denied saying that. There was this other story where, and like the HR rep is sitting there. There's this other story where he said, oh, I went to this hockey game and I body checked this girl and she broke her nose. And somebody else who is a mom called him out and said, were you not taught any manners? And he said, oh, well, she deserved it. He said, I heard wrong. And he's actually on a competitive hockey league and you're allowed to do that. Okay, so that's another thing I heard wrong. Mm-hmm. I called him out for 2-3 more things and he said, oh no, like you heard it wrong. So I'm looking at the HR lady after every time he's saying, no, you just heard that wrong. And I'm like, oh no, yeah, you're right. I must have just heard that wrong as well. I must have heard all of these things wrong. Mm-hmm. So he pretty much denied everything, said I heard wrong, which is, okay, you can do that. I'm looking at the HR person where, like, okay, we both get it. So there's that. And then yeah, I just couldn't. So nothing's going to change. Nothing did change. They put out this company survey about, oh, give us feedback. In the survey, I was super honest. That same woman I was saying.
I'm just laughing because it's like, this is what we're going to pick to do is, again, a task. Let's do a survey.
Yeah. And so in the survey, I was super honest. The other person who I felt like opened the door for me to be able to talk, the other white female, she was super honest. And it was like 3 words to describe the company. And I wrote, favoritism, sexist, and I wrote 2-3 other words, and she did the same, and all of the words were the exact same. They had the exact same meaning. And after that, it's supposed to be anonymous, but, you know, they knew exactly who called the company racist. It was just me and her and one other person, and they did nothing. I even wrote the survey. The survey was through a third-party company as well, and I even wrote, there's no point. Nothing's going to change.
Well, where's your trust?
There is none.
Like, you have not had any from day one. Because, like, sometimes people will be like, well, what do you want? Or what does support look like to you?
Yeah.
And it's certainly not all those things that just happened.
Yeah. I had to wait like 9 months to have somebody tell me that I was validated. And the reason I knew it really did impact that person was because, you know, after you have a talk, you send a follow-up email. I was like, okay, I'll send my follow-up email the next day. He messaged me a few hours later and said, I'm still reeling from what you told me. And he's a manager. He's a higher up in the company. And he's telling me he's reeling from what I told him and that it shouldn't be like this. But as much as I have so much respect for him, nothing changed.
Yeah, that's the other thing, though, too, is like, I appreciate you feeling this way. But again, the impact, unfortunately, the impact is not big enough for many white people for there to be change.
Yeah.
For them to respond in all the ways that they have so far. And like, you know what, to everyone listening too, we say this on the show often, is validation is not the same as agreeing with someone. Those are two different things. You could kick the shit out of me, right? And our mom can still validate you for kicking the shit out of me, but she doesn't have to agree that, you know, hopefully she doesn't agree that it was okay. And somehow, even in human resources, we still believe that those are the same thing. So no one goes near, I'm sorry. No one goes near, what was that process like for you? No one says, I have your back. All the things that you need. But yet the person that continues to behave the way they do keeps getting, I'm sorry to hear this. How are you doing? So where are you supposed to go with all of these feelings? If you had a way in which you really wish they had done something different, what would that be? What would be that one thing that they could have done different?
Well, I feel like I don't want to be a part of a workplace that lets stuff like this happen and slide. I want to be a part of a workplace that, no, we don't support anybody saying these things. All people are valued. But in my company, what it feels like, they don't value certain people. He's never been reprimanded. I'm not even the first person who's complained about him. It's the fact that so many people have, and he's never been in trouble. And everybody who goes after him is seen as the person who's, you're going after him. You're the bully. Why are you saying these things about him? But nothing's ever actually been done. It'd be nice to work in a company where if one person is saying this and 10 people are complaining, how about we deal with the one person that they're complaining about instead of making the 10 people that complained feel bad. Like, that's not the type of company I want to be a part of. But then the other thing goes into that is, like, a lot of people don't step up because right now it's so hard to be unemployed and nobody wants to risk losing their job for somebody. I get that. But it sucks.
Well, and you, again, have to, the risk is what? Like, you have to experience abuse in order to, like, maybe one day get this, you know, pilot position. And also, I'm sorry, as a customer who gets on a plane that pilots fly, I want my pilot to have really good mental health and have really good well-being. Like, a pilot's already got whatever personal life problems. Your hope is that this company you're representing, when you get on this plane, it has your back. There's so many things that I would imagine as a pilot, for psychological reasons, all these things that you have to go through to make sure you're okay. And when your own place of work is not a safe place to be, you know, if we want to start getting into psychological safety, this is always the issue, is workplaces will say, well, we give you so much space to talk about it and no one steps up. And something that I had to learn in leadership as well is sometimes the staff that don't step up, it's like they're saying a lot in not stepping up.
They are.
And they're watching us as leaders and managers and all that. And they're watching the interactions. And so how safe would they feel to say something if the manager on one hand is saying one thing or the company is doing all these other things? You know, it's great that that manager apologized. I'm glad you at least got that. I'm glad he followed up. At the same time, though, it's like the amount of care you had for his reputation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like where was someone caring enough about yours?
Exactly.
And it's never about getting that guy fired. So where are we at now in a scenario? Is there no resolution at this point?
No,
are we just
nothing.
filling out surveys and
Yeah, we're just
walking around the issue?
We're just going to work every day and that's it. Nothing was resolved. Nothing happened. I stopped talking. I don't mention him. And I've openly started talking to him where if we're working and in our team group chat, I'll heart what he says. I'll thumbs up what he says just so nobody thinks I'm the bully.
You're always going to be the bad guy. You're always the aggressor. In social media and in the media, we're constantly portrayed as that way.
Yeah.
It's going to be no different because even people of color go against each other. Because media's done such a good job portraying what's happening that even we go against either our own people or other people of color.
Yeah, that's the ethnic racism. We all have that as well. It's not just a racial bias, but there's so much racism in our own communities too, where we put each other down.
We do. And if we could start, if even we could start with recognizing that we have this common thread that white people don't have, is being treated this way day in and day out.
Yeah.
When majority of the visible minorities, people of color, global majority, however you want to put it, BIPOC are talking about our experiences and you want to collect stats, the percentage is pretty high to day-to-day experiences like this.
Yeah.
And so question really then is, okay, so if this is going to continue, where do we stand when we continue to support the same thing by speaking ill of a Black person or Indigenous person or a Muslim person? We also have to do our work as people of color and come together and understand that this is one thing that will always be the common thread between us. And if we can't, support our Chinese friend or our Black friend, sometimes I feel like, okay, then we're not helping ourselves.
Exactly.
So how do we step up to the plate and have each other's back?
Yeah.
Because I know for me, it's a lot of my own conversations that I'm having with myself too about how do we start to support people of color more and encourage these conversations to come out.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're doing is great. Having a safe space where you can come and you can talk about it is going to be part of the solution. It's going to take time to get to a place where it's not like this anymore and there's no stigma around talking about it. But right now there is. So having a safe spot like this where you can actually come and openly talk is really nice.
I appreciate that, Kajal, because I think that's what we were saying in the beginning. This is the therapeutic place. And I'm not just saying our platform. I'm glad we have this for us. But a space where, whether it's in our household, with a Jessica, with whatever friends, partners we have, that we can say, I just don't feel like I matter.
Exactly.
You know what? You're already going to be judged. You're already the aggressor. You're already the bad person. You're already one that's problematic.
Yeah.
Then if that's the case, then say what's on your mind because you're already that way.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? We just have to start to stand up.
Exactly.
And you want to be an ally out there. I think the question is, what will it take to invite you as a white person to stand up with us? And give us a space to share our story. When you get a call from a friend like Kajal who tells you about her work experience, are you going to be silent on the other end?
Yeah.
Are you going to have validation on the other end? Are you going to get so angry that Kajal has to now protect you? And, because then it's like what that guy did, which was fighting for you in the wrong way and doing what was yours to do, which was have your voice and do what you needed to do to go to HR. So can I ask you, do you feel after this incident, you feel more equipped to respond if something like this, because it will happen. Sorry, not if, when something like this happens again.
I feel like now because of this, I feel like I am on the way to finding my voice. So I feel like if something like this was to happen again, I would be able to manage it better because I wouldn't let somebody else get involved and take that away from me. I feel like I would have more ownership of it and I would be able to deal with it right away. I wouldn't sit in those feelings as much. Now I would be able to say something right on spot. But I feel like that's the biggest part was that somebody else interfered and they took that away from me. I wouldn't let that happen again.
Yeah. That's a big part. I think that's a really good piece for allyship is, again, that where's your position in this and how are you standing next to the victim who's
Exactly.
experienced racism versus standing in front.
Yeah.
And sometimes our white friends and our coworkers care so much and really with their privilege sometimes don't understand how much confidence and power they have.
Yeah.
I think it's lovely when people care for us that way, but I think asking yourself, like, is this for my own agenda, or what does my friend or my loved one here, what do you need?
Yeah.
What do you do right away? You say, how are you?
Yeah.
What was that? Not, okay, let's talk about stereotypical things we get.
Yeah.
So, okay, we talked about the one, which is, are you still talking about this?
Oh, like you haven't moved on?
You haven't moved on is another one. What else do we, does that really happen still?
Yeah. Can't you just drop it? I'm sure he didn't mean it like that.
But he's so nice.
He's so nice.
I know him
he's just
from
young.
there. He doesn't know better. She's really old.
Yeah.
She doesn't know better. She's a grandma.
Yeah. You can't change the way people think.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Or my favorite, why are you making it so uncomfortable by addressing this now?
Exactly.
This isn't the time or place to address it.
Exactly. The time or place thing is so real because when is the right time or place and who's dictating that?
They're lazy workers.
Yeah.
These, people that come from overseas, they're lazy. And okay, so now what? Now you've determined they're lazy. Now what's going to happen?
Yeah. And a lot of the people that are coming here, they have degrees. They just can't use them because they're not valued here. So what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to pick up these jobs. And then as soon as they do, they're told, oh, you're just taking our jobs. But I'm sorry. Did you want to go clean those toilets?
Did you want to go work in the lottery booth?
Yeah. Got Tim Hortons, make coffee for everyone. Is that what you wanted? You weren't applying for that job anyway. So how did they take it away from you?
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, don't we want our community to thrive? Now, I guess, think about, okay, like, do you want to seat at that table or do you want to build your own table? Invite, your Punjabi pilot's lunch table.
Well, it's just so nice to even have that because you're creating a community where you can openly talk about stuff like this. And it's not a shortage. Like, everybody has been through it. There's no shortage of stories.
No, there isn't. And I think that's where it's really disheartening when you hear people say that's still happening.
Yeah.
Or you're still talking about that thing. Again, I'll never get over that because, we're still dealing with something that happened 2-3 years ago, few months ago. My sister, like I said, on the 50th episode shared, no one else knows this.
Yeah.
She knows the trauma she is working through.
Exactly.
And I asked her if I could bring this up and she said yes, but I'm not going to get into her trauma, but it's not something you just let go.
No.
It is equivalent to saying, well, just deal with the physical abuse.
Yeah.
Just deal with the fact you were raped. Those are all things that we're allowed to grieve for. Why are we not allowed to grieve about racism?
Exactly.
Because it doesn't serve people.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
It doesn't serve the majority people that run the show.
Yeah.
You guys got to look at that, man. Like, we can't,
Exactly.
we're not going to stop talking.
No.
I know I'm not.
I'm not either. I'm at a place where I don't want to stop talking. Why is it that this happens to me and I just have to drop it? But it's happening to so many other people, so why can't we just talk about it?
Mm-hmm. I think for a lot of people of color listening today, there's like, and I think for us, all we can do is start with ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think we have to open our eyes a little wider. Not in how poorly to treat others. I hope that we are respectful and kind to all people, including white people, all people. I just want us to do our education and learn about the history of where we live and where we come from and why we are still in this boat of being told you can't be working in this place and you're only there because you're diversity hire. Yeah. That's part of a bigger story.
It is. Sure.
When this incident was going on, and maybe it's not just this incident, but in general, and maybe you can sort of represent people of color or Apne people, have you at times felt like it was something you did wrong to bring the treatment on?
Yeah, that's with the whole, when I said I was starting to sympathize with him because he saw me as a threat. I feel like at that moment, I felt like, oh, I get it. Because I had these connections, this is why this is happening to me. But that's not why it's happening to me. It's so much bigger than that. I feel like a lot of the ways we look at things get skewed as well. And how could they not? There's so much outside influence.
Yeah. What are the things that you think get skewed?
Well, I feel like your perception as well, because I didn't do anything to deserve this, that I think, but maybe this other person thinks I did do something. Like maybe my brownness was too loud. Maybe I was vocalizing too much where I'm from, who I am, my people, or when somebody brings up Surrey and I defend it, maybe that's wrong. So I feel like a lot of it, you end up victimizing yourself.
Yeah, because all the things you just talked about are your identity.
Yeah.
So like you have to defend your identity. And now like what I hear you saying is, well, maybe I cared too much or talked too much about me.
Yeah.
So again, I have to assimilate. I have to work with the familiarity. I have to take out my identity. And a lot like that person of color at your work that you're saying it doesn't identify themselves as a person of color. I'm not saying I know their story, but there are a lot of us out there that won't identify where we're from or who we are or what. And a lot of it is if you can't beat them, join them.
No.
I have to think of my family and get ahead. And it's so sad because I know for me, I'm picking up the pieces now. Losing a lot of who you are.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of work I have to do, a lot of apologies I have to make to our people, to our people that I thought were harming me more than not.
Yeah.
You know, because I decided to, if you can't beat them, join them mentality. Exactly. And so there's a lot of backwards work. Oh, wait a minute, wait a second. Where did my pride go?
Exactly.
And you said our family fought to be here.
Exactly. They did. Yeah.
That person telling you at work, you got to fight for this. It's like, no, you guys are used to that. We're done fighting that.
Yeah. Like now, it's 2024.
Yeah.
You can Google it. Yeah.
Now we have a platform for our voice.
And that's why I've started to respect my name more. So now if somebody's saying my name wrong, I'm going to correct them. Or if they're talking about places like Surrey, the Northeast, I'm going to correct them. This is also part of aviation, but I was working at my school at the Calgary Flying Club, and I was looking to move out, and my friend at the time, she was looking to move out. Not just friend, she was also my manager. So like 2 years older than me. We're both looking to move out. So it just made sense to get like a 2-bedroom, split the cost, so much cheaper that way. So we move out, and I remember the first thing I said to her is, hey, my parents are going to come over. They're going to help me set up. Can you just not come with your boyfriend for an hour? No respect for me. She still showed up, and I was like, this is a big deal for me to even be able to move out. And on top of that, the only thing I'm requesting is please don't bring your boyfriend for only 1 hour that my parents are there. I don't want them to be like, day one and she already has guys in here. Like there's so much negativity around that as well. And so I asked her, and she comes right away. Like, you're going to say you didn't get my message. And then it was like little things started happening where I would be leaving for work and I noticed the door wasn't locked. So I told her, hey, can we like start locking the door more? And she said, oh, this is in the Northeast. It's safe here. What does that mean? I'm sorry.
I guess for like those listening, like that are experiencing this, it's really important that we do share these experiences or feelings, because I think like hearing you say, yep, is like, okay, I'm not crazy.
No, because it happens to all of us. It's so relatable.
Just constantly in this weird place of I've done something wrong.
Well, that's also, so I have a similar story to your national story.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know Ricardo's Hideaway or whatever it's called.
I'm not cool anymore.
It's National 2.0, where it's like, it is national. It's built right beside the National.
People, right?
It's the same people, but it's just like more just a restaurant, less of a club type vibe.
Okay.
So go there. It's wintertime. We're going for their Christmas drinks. It's me and my friend Jessica. So I go there first because Jessica's still driving. I go there. I'm like, oh, a table for 2. And she's like, oh, it's a 3-hour wait. I'm looking around. There's like 3 tables taken. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, can I get on the list? And she's like, yeah, but it's still a 3 hours wait. And I'm like, okay. So I step out. And as soon as I step out, Jessica's walking in. So I tell Jessica, I'm like, hey, we won't be able to get a table. It's a 3-hour wait. And I told her, I'm like, it's like empty in there. I'm not sure why. She's like, let me go. So she goes in there, gets a table.
Yeah.
And so she came out to grab me because I was still outside waiting. And she's like, oh, we got a table. We go in there. And the same server is staring at me, like giving me a look. And it's like, 3 hours. But she got a table right away.
So that is an example of 7,000 more things we could probably throw out there and say, this is every day, everyone.
Yeah.
Every day. And if you are out there experiencing this every day, please make sure that you are not allowing yourself to just become immune to it.
Exactly.
We, may not know what to say. And sometimes that's the thing, is because it's those hidden, those microaggressions. It's not really forthcoming. And so again, if you say something, then it's you heard it wrong.
Yeah.
So you have to go somewhere to say it to someone. Maybe in the moment, I don't know if I would have said something to the server. I don't have those kind of balls. I would have been like, no. But then bringing it up in our group of people or with the Jessicas who can understand with us that this is happening.
Yeah.
And once people start to recognize, oh yeah, it is happening, maybe we can get to the next step where we can start to provide this kind of zero tolerance mentality that we can't deal with that. Like, that's not acceptable.
No, and it's so normalized to the point where I didn't even think of it as being racist. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And then it wasn't until we sat down and Jessica was like, that was pretty fucking racist.
Yeah.
It wasn't until she said it that I was like, oh my God, it was. Because like stuff like that happens and you're just used to it.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until she said it that I was like, you know what? It was.
Yeah.
And you become so immune to it that you don't even realize what it is.
Yeah, you don't. Exactly. What are the ways, if we look at coping mechanisms, like what are some things that we can share and maybe create a little bit of a toolbox? Like, what are some things for those listening, maybe like our lovely ally white friends that are listening that are like worked up with us? And I know who you are. You reach out to me all the time. You guys are great. We love you. We love all of our people and our guests. See, this is me feeling guilty and bad because I don't want our white people and white friends to be offended. So I'm going to call myself out. This is me being like, you're great though. Yeah. And I don't know, we can all laugh or say whatever. I can't believe I just did that, but that's how we do that,
but
right?
That's how it is, yeah.
Soon as we say something and then it's like, okay, now I got to agree with you 10 times in a row so you know that I'm not actually being mad at you. No. I'm just saying that wasn't okay.
Exactly.
So every other thing you're going to say after that, I'm like, totally. Yeah, because I'm like, oh shit, I don't want you to feel like, oh, Kieran, there she goes again. But if you are saying that, oh, Kieran, there she goes again, like, please lean into it and look at that. Is there a different way that we can help you respond with? Because that doesn't help us. No. That doesn't help you. And it doesn't help the way that we're continuing to live in Canada in particular, but parts of the world where the Western and the Eastern worlds clash. We don't have really enough, I think, safety to be able to start talking about it. And that's not to say that work's not being done.
Yeah.
It's just, I think, when we respond, we're just asking for validation, reassurance that this just happened to us and we need someone to help acknowledge that. I still can't get over my sister. She had 3 white people with her who did not have her back.
Exactly. And why is that? Why is it that, like, I don't agree with the fact that maybe they didn't notice. They probably did notice.
Oh, they did know because she was freaking out and bawling because this guy was harassing her and following her in the bar and wouldn't stop and kept saying, well, how does this work, to the fact that they're in this interracial relate, all that stuff, right? And so go listen to episode 50. Those of you are like, what? You'll see we got Serena on to share this, which was a big deal. Thank you to Serena for doing that. But those that are there with us, those 3 folks in there have to really think hard about what the fuck was that about. And if they're not thinking about that, or if they're thinking get over it, you're the problem.
Yeah.
It's not those 2 dudes in there that were doing what they were doing. It's the 3 of you then that are allowing a loved one to experience that. And everyone, we talked about this that day too. People would have responded differently if someone got punched in the face.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about, are there some ways that people can be allies? What would be a good way to be an ally?
I feel like somebody who speaks up, if they notice that something was just said to you and you weren't able to voice your opinion, maybe if they can voice up for you, if they can say, hey, that was wrong, don't say that to my friend, something like that. Somebody who's actually there for you and will be able to be your voice in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's not always that if something happens to us, we can speak on it right away. Yeah. Sometimes you need your friend to be like, hey, that was not cool. Why'd you even say that? Yeah. Or like, why are you saying something like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a good ally would be somebody who doesn't take your voice away from you.
Yes.
But they're able to help you voice what you need to say.
Yeah. Like, what do we do here? First things first is like a first responder in an emergency situation. Check the victim. Are you okay? Where are your wounds? What do we need to right away immediately help you with here? And then, okay, the next thing is like, how do we respond? How do we, not how should I go and do it? Yeah. And also what you should go do, but like, how do we respond? Because sometimes people don't want anything done.
No.
Other than just let me tell you about it, because I don't have the confidence and the capacity to go deal with this big deal thing. Like what you're doing at your work, so many people don't do because it is so much more work. Your job's on the line now. You are a problem. You're young. You're starting out as a pilot and you're going to go, let's say, to a different company. It's a small world and you're very easy to spot. One of the things that we talked about that I want to highlight again when we talk about allyship is that, as we were saying, many BIPOC experience painful impact of microaggressions and other forms of racial trauma. Yeah. And as you've explained today too, you then receive very limited support. Yeah. The system is not set up to support these kinds of incidents. Even though nothing's really been rectified, Kajal, sadly, I would have been more surprised if today you're like, everything was great and now, I'm pilot of the year and I'm flying. I think we knew how this was going to end. And that's the thing that we should keep saying. Why do we know how this movie ends? Yeah. Like, that's a problem that we know how this movie, and anyone listening today was expecting this movie to end a different way. I think, again, that's a really good sign that maybe there's got to be a little bit more curiosity in what it is day in, day out for people of color. Yeah. Some of the allyship stuff, you talked about validation. Like often the reactions are invalidation, minimize the impact, as you and I have been talking a lot of. So this happens to everyone. He did that to other people too.
He didn't mean it like that.
Right. All those things, right? Disbelief that it's even racism. Yeah. So they ask a lot of questions. Do you really think it was about race? Yeah. Like I remember I was telling the CEO where I worked at about the national, and this was a CEO of where I worked. And even her response to me was, but is that what he really said to you? Yeah. And I always remember that because I was like, you're running this agency. You're all about feminism. You're all about this and that. And that's the first thing you could think of saying to me.
And that's invalidating right there.
And I have to defend it.
Exactly.
So what am I going to say? Well, I heard it wrong? Yeah. Don't worry. I'm already questioning it day in and day out. Exactly. Did I hear it wrong? Did I make a big deal? Yeah. Don't worry. We're already trying to hear it a different way too. But we promise you it wasn't wrong. When someone of color is sharing their story, pause, say less. Like that friend that was not quiet, but listening. Yeah. Listen. Put your phone away. Do what you got to do. Be present, but listen to the person telling you this happened. Yeah. Make a mental note and name the emotion you're feeling before responding. So sometimes it's defensiveness. Ask yourself, oh, that's the pause. Like why? What is that really what I want to say to Kajal, who just said this is what happened to her? Yeah. Ask yourself, what is needed now? Like, what do I think Kajal needs right now? I'm sure Jessica and all these good people around you probably think like that. Okay, like, what should I help with here? How can I? Acknowledge and validate. You and I said this too. You don't need to read an article. Talk to a person of color. They'll tell you exactly what to do. Use the words that validate. And so you're upset. You have every reason to be. Yep. I'm sorry you had to go through it. It sounds like implicit bias and racism. Yep. This is a hard issue to bring up. I'm so glad that you trust me. That's the other thing. When someone comes to you to tell you that they experienced this, and especially if you're white, you're lucky. Yeah. They see some trust. They really, really trust you. So lean into that trust a little bit and say, thanks for trusting me to share this. Yeah.
They saw something. There's a reason they're coming to you.
Yeah. I don't need you to right away say, go take a course or you should have said this to that person. Ask more. Be curious about it. This is the first time we're talking about this, but I'm betting you've experienced this before. Exactly. That's such a lovely way to be acknowledged.
Validation can go a long way because when you feel invalidated, when somebody says, oh, you must have heard wrong, right away, you feel like shit. You need somebody who's there for you and can be like, hey, no, you have every right to feel like this. What can we do about it? Yeah. How are we going to handle it?
Yeah. Is it okay if I ask you some questions to better understand? Yeah. And I think as a person asking questions, like, are you asking for the juicy story? Yeah. What did he say? What did she say? So that's content. Exactly. Give me the full story. Yeah. We already gave you the story. So are you going to ask more process questions? Okay, when that was going on, what did you want to say? What were you hoping for? Tell me more about that. Do I understand this correctly? Yeah. Like, those are great ways to feel like we are being heard. And there's no fix to that. No. We're not saying go call my HR and solve it. Yeah. In fact, you made it very clear that that was not what you wanted that person to do. Yeah. just hear me out.
Yeah, because nobody wants to feel like they're crazy or overthinking. We all just want to fit in and feel validated and know that like what we're saying matters.
And if this is happening in the workplace, I would hope someone in the workplace would say something like, this doesn't get in the way of your job performance because you're bringing that up. I think if any of those work managers, leaders, HR people, if they had said that, because that is what you're most worried about. Like you said, I don't want to be a problem.
Yeah.
And now your skill set, the thing you're really good at, that you did a lot of hard work, like you said, to get to, is the thing that people are going to focus in on when that's not even the thing. And a lot of what you and I were talking about, to sum up what we're saying today in terms of how we really want to be part of reducing the stigma against racism and really trying to resolve it, I think these are the things that we could start with, and a lot of own self-reflection of what's my role in this. Don't worry, I do that all the time. I ask myself, I feel guilty for my things too. So, you know, for the friends and the people that I've lost along the way, I finally found my voice and I'm starting to use it. And now you're going to get to know the real me.
Because nobody wants to lose friends, and nobody wants to lose them because you're finding yourself.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks.
It does suck, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wish I had asked you today, or something we were sharing earlier that we want to go back to?
Well, I would say the only thing that I have a problem with is the word diversity hire. And I feel like it's so hard for us. We can sit here and redefine it. But is anybody else going to look at that and be like, okay, yeah, diversity hire doesn't necessarily mean that the company's lowering their standards. I feel like as a whole, we need to look at inclusivity in a different way. Diversity hire means you're lowering your standard. Inclusivity doesn't need to mean that. So there's a way that companies can move forward. You can be more inclusive without putting people down. And I feel like a lot of companies need to work on that.
What would you see happening that would make you think, oh, this company's getting it?
Well, I feel like, for one, they would be able to validate. If there's a problem, they would be able to validate the people rather than try and quiet it or like create a program to shut you up type of thing.
Yeah.
I feel like actually acknowledging that, oh, this happened. We actually have a problem in this company. We need to solve the problem and get to the root of it.
Yeah.
Rather than being like, that didn't happen. Let's shove it in a box.
Okay. So is there anything else you want to touch on?
I think that's it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
If you had a call to action, we said a lot.
Yeah.
If there was one thing that sort of resonates with you that you hope would resonate with people listening today that they could think about or they could go and do, what would that one thing be?
I think my call to action would be an ally, or learn how to be an ally. If you see somebody going through something, just say something. Stand up for them. Have their back. Be a friend to them. It's so much easier said than done because most people don't want to stand up and make problems as well. So it's easier for them to be quiet. But imagine what that person's going through. They already feel attacked. They feel alienated. They feel alone. It would be so nice to be able to stand up for them, and they would appreciate it too.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really well said. Yeah. I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, I hope you come back again. And maybe we'll have a lighter topic or something, or maybe we come back again. Honestly, this meant the world to me when you reached out and felt like you were in a place that you wanted to come and talk about this.
Yeah.
I truly, truly am sorry that you at 27 years old have to go through something like this day in, day out.
Yeah.
And I really hope that you, maybe not at work, but outside of work, I really hope you have the support and connection and can share what you're going through so you don't feel alone on the drive to work and the drive from work. If you stay the course, my hope is that some good or some lesson, some learning will come out of this. And often it does. It's often these experiences are the catalyst to something big and better and hopefully helpful to the community.
Yeah.
So thank you for not losing your light. I can see the fire in you. I can see the light. And I think, okay, good. You still have it.
Yeah.
And I honestly am so, so, so excited for you being the brown lady pilot that you are. Like to me, it's pride. It's pride that you're sitting there and working through the shit that you are at work because you see a bigger picture and you're fighting the fight, not for you. I can tell you're fighting the fight for a lot of us that just didn't have the place and voice to be able to do so.
I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
There's still so much out there that
it's
needs
disheartening.
To be fought. It does suck. It really does.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't something you can go and tell your grandma.
No.
You don't want them to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's disheartening that they're like all that work, all that fight, leaving their home country,
Yeah.
all that just for their grandkids to be continuing to experience the same stuff. Thank you with that courage coming on. And hopefully we'll have more stories like yours that people are ready and wanting to talk about. And for those of you listening today, these conversations are always door openers. And they will remain door openers, doors open wide. So please reach out, tell us your story. Maybe you don't want to come on and talk about it, and that's okay. I just hope that you get something out of this episode. So let us know what it meant to hear Kajal's story. What are some questions you might have? And for anyone else that's listening as well, you do want to come on and add to this story, add to the journey of ending the stigma against racism. You know where to find us. Please reach out. Really grateful for everyone that's listening. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.